The room was small and deliberately so. Not a police interrogation room, those had a specific institutional aesthetic that this room had been designed to avoid. This was a corporate suite repurposed for a particular kind of pressure. Clean table, 2 chairs, fluorescent overhead light that was slightly too bright for comfort, a window that looked onto a corridor rather than outside. The kind of room that said, "This is not official, this is a conversation, you can leave whenever you want." The kind of room where everything about the design was a lie. Tiana had been in it for 11 minutes when the Seo family lawyer came in. She had counted. He was the same man from the corridor, silver-framed glasses, the mouth that did something that was not quite a smile, the suit that communicated decades of expensive professional practice. He sat down across the table from her with the ease of someone who had done this many times and had always gotten what he came for. He placed a single document on the table between them. He placed a pen beside it. He did not say good evening. He did not introduce himself again. He simply looked at her with the particular expression of someone about to offer something they expect to be accepted. "Miss Tiana," he said, "I want to speak plainly." She looked at the document. She did not touch it. "The evidence against you is substantial," he said. "IP confirmation, login credentials, transfer amounts that correspond with specificity to a known personal financial gap." He paused, letting each item land with the weight he had assigned it. "A prosecution pursued fully would be lengthy, damaging, the kind of thing that follows a person." He looked at her. "I don't think that serves anyone's interests." She said nothing. "What I am proposing," he continued, "is a resolution. You sign an acknowledgement of the incident, not a criminal confession, an administrative acknowledgement, and you tender your resignation from Daesong Holdings effective immediately. You return to the United States." He nodded toward the document. "In recognition of your service, a severance package will be arranged. The amount is outlined on page 2. A pause, precise and deliberate. "You may notice it corresponds to a figure relevant to a family member's educational expenses." The room was very quiet. Tiana looked at the document on the table, at the pen beside it, at the clean edges of something that had been prepared carefully. The same quality she had noticed about the Busan document, the same neatness of something designed by someone who understood her well enough to know exactly where to aim. She thought about the church, the plain windows, the candle that burned without flickering, the particular settling of a mind that had finally found the one number that did not move. A foundation built on a lie cannot support anything real. She had known that in a pew on a Seoul street with the document in her lap. She knew it now in a fluorescent room with a different document on a different table and a man across from her who had miscalculated, in the same way the mother had miscalculated, in the same way everyone who had come at her across a table had miscalculated, by assuming that what she needed could be used to purchase what they wanted. She looked at him. "I didn't seek God's guidance just to sign a lie," she said. Her voice was even, completely even. "Call my lawyer." He looked at her. The not-quite smile did something slightly different, recalibrated, reassessed. He had not expected that. Not the refusal specifically, but the quality of it. The particular stillness of someone who has already decided and cannot be moved by anything he has in the room. "You don't currently have representation," he said. "Then I'll wait until I do," she said. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him steadily. She was not performing composure. She was simply composed, in the deep, specific way of someone who has found their footing and is standing on it regardless of what the room is doing around them. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the document. He picked up the pen. He stood without hurry, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the room. The door closed. She sat alone in the fluorescent light. She was afraid. She was too honest with herself to pretend she wasn't. The fear was real and specific and present, and it had been present since the elevator doors opened and 4 people stepped out. But the fear and the decision existed in separate rooms inside her, and she had learned, in a church pew that morning, how to keep them from bleeding into each other. She sat very still. She waited. Welcome to Afro-Korean drama, and we are back for part 4. If you have been here since the elevator, since the lip gloss, since the first morning greeting that changed everything, this episode is for you. Every piece that has been moving across this story arrives in this room today. And I need you to know something before we go further. This is the penultimate chapter. The finale of Tiana and Daesung's story is coming. Everything that happens in part 4 is building toward an ending that I have been writing towards since the very first scene of this series. And I promise you it will be worth every episode you have watched. If you are just joining us, make sure to hit that subscribe button, go back to part 1 and start from the beginning. You need everything that came before for what happens here to land the way it should. For those who have been here from the start, drop in the comments where you are watching from right now. And let's finish this. Now let's go. What had happened between the corridor and the interrogation room was this. Daesung's phone call had reached the company's head of legal, a man named Attorney Kwan, who had worked with Daesung Holdings for 14 years and whose loyalty to the institution was genuine and whose loyalty to its CEO was, in this particular moment, the thing that mattered. The call had been brief. The instruction had been clear. Attorney Kwan had arrived in the corridor within 12 minutes, a speed that told the auditor and the lawyer that the phone call had been more significant than they had anticipated, and he had done what lawyers did in situations like this, inserted himself between the process and its intended outcome with enough procedural precision to bring everything to a temporary halt. Tiana had not been arrested. She had been placed on administrative suspension pending internal investigation. Her access badge had been deactivated. She had been escorted, not in handcuffs, not by the officers, but by the auditor and a Daesung HR representative who had materialized from somewhere, to the corporate suite on the 3rd floor where the interrogation had taken place. Daesung had watched her go. She had looked back once, not for reassurance, not asking him to stop it, just looking at him with the particular directness she had always given him, the look that said, "I see you, I trust you, I know you are working." Then she had turned forward and kept walking, and the corridor had swallowed her. He had turned to the auditor and the lawyer and the officers with an expression that was the coldest thing the 12th floor had witnessed since the building was constructed. "You have 24 hours, he said, "before I have responses to everything you brought into this building tonight." Then he went back to work. The IT security team was assembled at 9:17 that evening. There were 4 of them: the head of cybersecurity, a man named Park Ji-hoon, who had the specific energy of someone who took violations of his systems as a personal insult, and 3 analysts who understood immediately from the quality of Daesung's presence in the server room that this was not a routine review. Daesung had removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled. He stood at the primary workstation with Park Ji-hoon, and he said very simply, "Someone used her credentials to initiate unauthorized transfers at 4:15 this afternoon from her terminal. I need to know where the access actually originated." Park Ji-hoon said nothing. He sat down and began working. The next 3 hours were the particular kind of silence that existed around complex technical work. Not empty, but concentrated. The silence of people applying full intelligence to a specific problem. Daesung stood or paced or sat, depending on what was happening on the screens. He did not rush them. He did not ask for updates every 15 minutes. He understood that the work required what it required, and his job was to stay present and available and not interrupt it. At 12:43 in the morning, Park Ji-hoon said, "There." Daesung came to the screen. The access that had initiated the transfers had not originated from Tiana's physical workstation. It had been executed through a remote session, a sophisticated intrusion that had used her login credentials to create what appeared at first layer to be a legitimate local session from her terminal. The credentials had been obtained through a keystroke capture installed on her workstation, a piece of software that had been placed there physically, requiring someone with brief access to her keyboard when she was not present. 11:15, the session that logged out 4 minutes early. The figure who had been briefly at the workstation beside hers. The remote session had originated from an external IP address. That address, routed through 2 layers of masking, Ponto to a server registered to a technology subsidiary of the CO Group. Park Ji-hoon looked at Dae-sung. "Do you want me to document this formally?" "Everything," Dae-sung said. "Every layer, every timestamp, formatted for a board-level presentation." Park Ji-hoon nodded. He turned back to the screen. Dae-sung walked to the window of the server room, a small window that faced the Gangnam night, the city doing what it always did, burning and indifferent. He took out his phone. He did not call Tiana. It was past 1 in the morning, and she needed whatever rest she could find. He stood at the window and looked at the city and thought about what he was going to do with what Park Ji-hoon had just shown him. He already knew. He had known since the corridor. He called Attorney Kwan. Tiana, at that same hour, was at her apartment table. She had come home in the particular state that followed significant ordeals, not broken, not relieved, not anything that had a clean name. Just present, in her body, in her space, in the specific quiet of an apartment that had been the site of so many significant things over the past weeks. She made tea. She drank it this time. Then she opened her laptop and she began. She did not have access to the company's server logs. Her badge was deactivated, her system access suspended. What she had was her memory, which was precise and chronological and had been running the events of the day since the moment the auditor spoke in the corridor. She began writing everything down, the timeline of the day, the 11:15 session timeout, the figure she had not seen at the workstation beside hers, the 4 minutes she had been in the bathroom, the exact sequence of her afternoon work. She cross-referenced it against everything she remembered about the transfer accusation, the time cited, the amount, the destination. She built a document the way she built everything, methodically, completely, with a cover index and version history, and a clarity that made every fact immediately findable. She worked until 2:30. Then she saved it, backed it up in 3 places, and went to bed. She did not sleep badly. She had said, "Call my lawyer," in a fluorescent room with nothing in her hand, and she had meant it, and she was still standing, and that was enough to sleep on. The next morning, she received 2 messages before 8 o'clock. The first was from Attorney Kwan, introducing himself and informing her that Dae-sung had retained him on her behalf and that she should not speak to anyone from the company or the CO group without him present. She read it twice. She felt something she did not examine too closely. The particular feeling of being caught before you fall, of someone having moved on your behalf while you were sleeping. The second message was from an unknown number that resolved, when she looked it up, to a residential address in Songbuk-dong. It said, "I am aware of what was done. I am not unaware of by whom. I will be in touch with my son. You do not need to respond to this message." She looked at it for a long time. Then she put her phone face down, opened her laptop, and kept building her document. It had been So-yeon. Of course it had been So-yeon. On the evening of the corridor arrest, after the floor had processed what it had witnessed, and the end-of-day departures had thinned to nothing, and the cleaning crew had begun their rounds, So-yeon had sat at her workstation for an additional 40 minutes. She had not been working on her brief. She had been thinking, with the particular focused efficiency she applied to everything, about what she had observed across 4 months of sitting beside Tiana. The work ethic, the integrity, the correction on page 17 that she had told nobody about, the morning greetings that continued through every form of institutional pressure, and the specific detail that had been nagging at her since 2:15 that afternoon, when Tiana had come back from the bathroom and frowned at her login screen. 4 minutes. Session timeout at 15. So-yeon had noticed that too, from her adjacent workstation. She had noted it and filed it and continued working. Now she retrieved it. She had also noticed, at 11:19, a figure briefly at the workstation beside Tiana's while Tiana was away. She had not paid particular attention at the time. She was paying attention now. She knew the address in Songbuk-dong. She had known it since her second week at Daesung Holdings because So-yeon considered knowing the organizational and personal infrastructure of any institution she joined to be relevant data. She took the subway. She rang the bell. The housekeeper opened the door and she said simply, "I work with Tiana. I need to speak with the lady of the house." She was shown to the sitting room. Daesung's mother came in with the wariness of someone who had not been expecting this particular visitor. So-yeon sat down without being asked, folded her hands, and told her everything. What had happened to Tiana in the corridor, the suspension, the interrogation room, and what had been offered in it. She had learned this from attorney Kwan through a chain of professional contact that would take too long to explain and was not the point. The IT trace, what it pointed to. She said all of it in the same flat, precise tone she used for everything. Then she said one more thing. You told her, at her apartment, that you thought your son was the only person in that building who deserved her. She looked at the older woman directly. I think you should decide whether you meant that. Then she stood, thanked her for her time, and left. Daesung's mother sat alone in her sitting room for a very long time after that. She thought about the apartment visit, about the offer she had made, and the terms she had set, and the woman who had looked at the document on the table and not touched it. She thought about what she had said at the door, without turning around, the thing that cost her something to admit. She thought about what it meant that she had said it, and what it meant that Tiana had stayed anyway. She thought about Chairman Seo, about the particular confidence with which he had managed the situation after Daesung's ultimatum, a confidence that had seemed, at the time, like the composure of a man accepting defeat. She understood now that it had been something else entirely. He had not been accepting defeat. He had been executing a contingency. She had created the situation. He had weaponized it. And the woman who had been caught in the result was the same woman she had privately acknowledged as the only person in that building who deserved her son. She went to her study. She opened the drawer where she kept things that were not for filing, private correspondence, personal documentation, the paper record of 30 years of relationships that had never been meant for institutional archives. She had been in these circles long enough to know that the most important information was always the kind that people assumed nobody was keeping. She began to work. She worked through the night in the particular focused silence of a woman who had spent 3 decades building leverage and was now, for the first time, deploying it in a direction she had not previously considered. By morning, she had what she needed. Daesung called the emergency board meeting for Thursday at 10. He did not tell his mother about it. He did not need to. She called him at 8:15 on Thursday morning and told him she would be present. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "All right," she said. "I have documentation, independent of your IT evidence. You will understand when you see it." He said nothing again for a longer moment, then, "All right." The boardroom at Daesung Holdings was on the 15th floor, a long room with a mahogany table that seated 22 floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Gangnam skyline and the particular atmosphere of a space that had absorbed decades of significant decisions and had learned not to show it. The board members arrived between 9:40 and 9:58, 12 of them, the full complement, their expressions carrying the specific mix of curiosity and caution that emergency meetings always produced. Chairman Seo arrived at 9:52. He was 71 years old, broad-shouldered in the way of men who had been physically imposing in their youth and still carried the architecture of it, with silver hair and the particular self-possession of someone who had never in his professional life walked into a room where he did not know where he stood. He took his seat with the ease of long habit. He greeted the board members near him with the warmth of genuine, long-standing relationship. He did not look at Daesung when he sat down. He did not need to. Daesung's mother arrived at 9:57 and took a seat at the far end of the table, not her usual position, which would have been adjacent to the chairman's end of the room. The far end. The particular positioning of someone who has decided something about where they stand. Daesung entered at 10 exactly. No jacket, the document portfolio under his arm. Park Ji-hoon's formal IT report in a separate folder. He stood at the head of the table and he looked at the room, at the 12 board members, at Chairman Seo, at his mother at the far end, and he said, "Thank you for coming. I'll be brief in the opening." He was not brief. He was precise, which was different. He laid out the timeline first: Tiana's employment, the transfer, the suspension, the interrogation. He stated these as facts without editorializing, the way he presented everything. Then he opened Park Ji-hoon's report. He walked the board through the IT evidence, the remote session, the credential capture, the keystroke software, the originating IP and its trace through 2 masking layers to the CO Group technology subsidiary. He placed printed copies of the report in front of each board member. He answered 2 technical questions from the board's financial officer with the same even precision. Then he stopped and he looked at the room. The evidence establishes that the transfer was initiated remotely using credentials obtained through hardware installed on Miss Tiana's workstation without her knowledge, he said. The originating infrastructure belongs to the CO Group. I am presenting this to the board because this affects the governance of this institution and the safety of its employees, and it requires a board-level response. The room was quiet. Chairman Seo let the quiet sit for exactly 5 seconds. Then he spoke. Mr. Jin, his voice was warm, the particular warmth of someone who had been in rooms like this for longer than most, and understood that warmth was its own form of authority. I appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation. He looked around the table, not at Dae-sung, at the other board members, making the room his audience rather than his opponents. What we have here is an IT forensics report produced by a team that operates under the direct authority of the CEO. I think we would all agree that in a matter where the CEO has a personal involvement with the individual at the center of the investigation, the integrity of evidence produced under his supervision is, at minimum, a question worth asking. A murmur around the table. Not agreement, but the sound of people considering a point that had some surface logic to it. Dae-sung looked at him. He did not respond immediately. Chairman Seo continued. I have sat on this board for 22 years. I have watched this company navigate difficult moments, succession, market pressures, leadership transitions. What has always protected Dae-sung Holdings in those moments is the integrity of its governance structures. He paused. When the CEO of this company becomes personally entangled with an employee, transfers her out of his direct chain of command through HR, which we should note was itself a procedural irregularity, and then, when that employee is investigated for a serious breach, produces evidence through his own team that clears her and implicates a founding family member, he let that hang. I think this board has an obligation to ask whether we are looking at evidence or at a narrative. The murmur was slightly louder this time. I am formally requesting, Chairman So said, that this board vote to appoint an independent external auditor to review both the IT findings and the circumstances of Miss Tiana's employment history at this company, and that, pending that review, Mr. Jin recuse himself from any decisions related to this matter, given his acknowledged personal conflict of interest. He sat back. He folded his hands. He looked at the room with the satisfaction of someone who had just executed a well-prepared move and was waiting for the board to process it. 3 board members were nodding. Not in agreement necessarily, in the way people nodded when they were considering something that sounded procedurally reasonable. Dae-sung looked at the 3 nodding board members. He looked at Chairman So. His expression did not change. The HR transfer was procedurally sound, he said. It was reviewed and approved by the HR director and documented in full. It is in the personnel record available to any board member who requests it. I would encourage anyone who considers it irregular to review the documentation before characterizing it in this room. He looked at the board's financial officer. The IT team's independence is also documented. Park Ji-hoon reports to the chief technology officer, not to my office. The chain of authority is in the organizational chart. Chairman So smiled, not the not-quite smile of his lawyer, a fuller, more confident version. With respect, Mr. Jin, the question is not whether the paperwork is in order. Paperwork is always in order when someone takes the time to put it there. He looked around the room again. The question is whether this board is comfortable with the optics of a CEO using institutional resources to protect a woman he is romantically involved with from a legitimate investigation. It was not a legitimate investigation, Dae-sung said. It was a frame-up. The evidence establishes that. Evidence you produced. Evidence the IT infrastructure produced. The logs do not have an agenda, Chairman So. The originating IP address does not have an agenda. The timestamp on the keystroke capture software installation does not have an agenda. He looked at him directly. You do. The room went very still. Chairman So looked at Dae-sung for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not the composure itself, but the quality underneath it. He had been in rooms like this for 22 years. He had never been spoken to in one quite like that. I would be very careful, he said quietly, about making accusations in a board meeting without the standing to back them up. I have the standing, Dae-sung said. I have the shares, the evidence, and the fiduciary responsibility to this institution that your actions have placed at risk. He paused. What I am about to say next is a matter of record. The frame-up of a Dae-sung Holdings employee using So Group infrastructure exposes this company to significant legal liability. If this board does not act on the evidence presented today, it becomes complicit in that liability. I want that understood clearly before any vote is called. Chairman So leaned forward. The warmth was gone now, replaced by something older and harder. You are 20 years younger than me, and you have been in this chair for 8 of them, he said. I was building what this chair stands on before you finished university. Do not sit in this room and lecture me about fiduciary responsibility. Then stop giving me reason to, Dae-sung said. The room was completely silent. Chairman So looked around the table. He was reading the room the way he had always read rooms, for the soft points, the uncertain faces, the members who could be moved. He found 3 who were still hovering, and he spoke directly to them. He spoke about the founding families, about what the So name had meant to Dae-sung's early capitalization, about board loyalty and institutional memory, and the particular thing that was lost when a company allowed its CEO's personal life to override its governance principles. He was good. He had always been good. The 3 hovering board members were listening with the specific attention of people who were genuinely undecided. He was building toward a vote. He could feel the room moving in the direction he needed it to move. He had 3 votes within reach, and he needed only 2 more. He did not see it coming from the far end of the table. Sang-won! The voice was quiet. It did not need to be anything else. It was the voice of a woman who had been in every significant room this company had ever produced, and who had, in 30 years, never once needed to raise it. Chairman So turned. Dae-sung's mother was looking at him from the far end of the table. She had not stood. She did not need to stand. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has known a person for a very long time and has just decided to stop pretending about something. We have known each other for 28 years, she said. I want to speak to you as someone who has known you for 28 years. The 3 hovering board members had stopped hovering. The entire room was looking at the far end of the table. What you did, she said, was not done to protect this company. It was not done to protect the alliance between our families. It was not done for the board or for the legacy or for any of the things you have been describing in the last 20 minutes. She looked at him steadily. It was done because your daughter was humiliated, because a young woman your daughter had been positioned against chose to stay when you assumed she would leave, and because you decided, without consulting me, without consulting anyone, to use the situation I had created as cover for something I would never have sanctioned. The room was absolutely still. Chairman So looked at her. Miss Suk, I am not finished, she said. The quietness of her voice did not change. It was the particular quality of quiet that had nothing left to manage. I came to this meeting with something. She opened the folder in front of her. She took out several documents, printed, organized, tabbed. She slid copies down the table toward the board members with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been distributing documents in boardrooms for 30 years. These are communications between a technical consultant retained by a So Group subsidiary and a former Dae-sung Holdings IT contractor. The correspondence details the planning and execution of the credential capture and remote session. The dates begin 11 days ago, 3 days after my son delivered his ultimatum to me at my residence. She looked at Chairman So. You began planning this before he had finished speaking in my sitting room. The room absorbed this. I also have, she continued, An account transfer record showing a payment from a So Group discretionary fund to the former IT contractor. The payment was made 48 hours before the session capture was installed on Miss Tiana's workstation. She folded her hands on the table. I have had these documents for 5 days. I gathered them independently of my son's investigation through channels that have nothing to do with Daesong Holdings. IT infrastructure and everything to do with 28 years of knowing which questions to ask and who to ask them to. She looked around the table, at the 3 board members who had been hovering, at the 9 who had not been, at the faces that were processing what had just happened, the complete inversion of the room, the evidence that had just arrived from a source that nobody could question the independence of. I spent 30 years building the alliances in this room, she said. I am telling this board directly that what Chairman Seo did was not an act of alliance. It was an act of personal interest that used institutional infrastructure to harm an innocent person, and that, if left unaddressed, creates a criminal liability for this company that dwarfs any governance concern he has raised in the last half hour. She looked at him one final time. Sungwon, I have known you for 28 years. What you did was wrong, and I will not sit at this table and watch you dress it up as anything else. Chairman Seo looked at her for a long moment. The confidence that had carried him through 22 years of board meetings was still in his posture. It did not dissolve, it did not collapse, but something underneath it had shifted permanently. He was looking at the woman who had been his most reliable ally in every significant vote this board had ever taken, and he was understanding, in real time, that she was not that anymore. He looked at the documents she had distributed. He looked at the room. He looked at Daesung. Daesung looked back at him with the same even composure he had carried for the past hour. He said nothing. He did not need to. Chairman Seo made one more attempt. He turned to the board members nearest him, the ones who had known him longest, whose relationships predated Daesung's tenure, whose loyalty to the founding era of the company was genuine. He spoke about legacy, about what had been built, about the particular loss that came when a company forgot where it came from in its rush toward wherever it was going. It was his most human speech of the morning, less institutional, more personal, the voice of a man who had given decades to something and was watching it turn away from him. It was not enough. He could see it in the faces, the documents on the table, the independence of the source, the 28 years that Daesung's mother had just invoked, not as a weapon but as a credential, the credential of someone who could not be accused of acting against Chairman Seo out of personal animosity, because everyone in the room knew she had no such animosity. She had simply told the truth. And the truth, laid on a mahogany table in front of 12 board members with version-controlled documentation and a payment transfer record, was not something Chairman Seo had a procedural motion to address. The vote was called at 11:47. It was not close. The formal resolution passed with 10 votes in favor, 1 abstention, and 1 vote against, Chairman Seo's own. It directed the immediate reinstatement of Tiana's employment and access, the formal clearing of her name in the company's internal records, the commissioning of an independent external investigation into the security breach with findings to be reported to the board, and the suspension of Chairman Seo's board participation pending the outcome of that investigation. He left the boardroom without speaking to anyone. At the door, he paused once, not long, not dramatically, just the pause of someone who has been in a room for 22 years taking one last look at it. Then he walked out, and the door closed behind him, and the room exhaled. Daesung stood at the head of the table. He looked at the vote record. He looked at the documents his mother had distributed. He looked at the far end of the table where she was gathering her materials with the same composed efficiency she brought to everything. Their eyes met across the length of the mahogany table. He nodded once. She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded back. It was not forgiveness. It was not a full repair. It was the beginning of something, the specific beginning that only happens between people who have been on opposite sides of something real and have found, through the thing itself, a reason to stop. Tiana's phone rang at 12:09. She was at her apartment table, her document open, her tea cold beside her, when Attorney Kwan's name appeared on the screen. She picked up on the first ring. He told her. The board meeting, the vote, the reinstatement. She would need to come in to collect her reinstated access badge and sign the formal documentation clearing her name. The company would be in touch about the external investigation timeline. Her record had been formally cleared as of 11:47 that morning. She sat with the phone in her hand after he hung up. The apartment was quiet around her. The document she had built through the night was still open on her laptop. The timestamps, the sequence, the evidence she had constructed from memory because she was the woman who caught errors on page 17, and she had applied that same precision to the worst moment of her professional life. She closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in the quiet. Then she went to get her coat. She took the bus. Of course she took the bus. She had taken the bus to this building on her first day in heels with a smudged lip gloss and 41 rejection emails behind her, and she was not going to let anyone take that from her by making this arrival feel different from every other arrival. She fixed her edges in the bus window. She applied the coral lip gloss. She looked at her reflection. She looked like herself. The lobby security desk had her new badge ready. The officer handed it to her with a professional nod that was just slightly warmer than professional, and she understood that the building knew what had happened in the boardroom this morning, the way buildings always knew, through the particular atmospheric transmission of significant institutional events. She clipped the badge to her blazer. She took the elevator to the 14th floor. The doors opened. She stepped onto the strategy team floor. The morning had moved into afternoon while she was in the boardroom, and the lobby and the bus and the floor was in the full active rhythm of a workday in progress. Heads lifted. Not the loaded whisper campaign lifting of part 2. Something different. The particular awareness of a floor that had watched something unjust happen and was now watching its reversal and did not quite know what to do with the relief of that. She walked to her desk. She sat down. She turned on her monitor. She logged in, her credentials working, the system accepting her, the ordinary miracle of institutional restoration. So-Yeon leaned over. "Welcome back," she said. 2 words, as always. Tiana looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did." So-Yeon looked at her own screen. "I did what was accurate," she said, which was, Tiana understood, the only language in which So-Yeon ever expressed anything. She had gone to the mother because it was the accurate thing to do, because So-Yeon always did the accurate thing regardless of whether it was the comfortable thing. Tiana opened her files. She began to work. Dae-sung came to the strategy floor at 3:15. He did not stay long, a brief appearance, the kind that the floor would interpret as exactly what it was, a CEO checking on an employee who had been through something significant. Professional on the surface. Everything else in the quality of the 2 seconds he stood at the edge of her desk, and they looked at each other without the need to say anything that could be overheard. "Board meeting?" she said quietly. "Resolved," he said. "Your mother?" A pause. Something moved across his face. "She was surprising," he said. Tiana looked at him. She thought about the message from the Songbuk Dong number. The woman who had sat across her table with a contract and a condition, and who had also stood at a door and said, without turning around, that Dae-sung was the only person in that building who deserved her. She thought about what it cost someone like that to stand up in a boardroom and say what she had apparently said. "Tell her," Tiana said quietly, "that I know." Dae-sung looked at her for a moment. He understood what she meant. He nodded once. He went back downstairs. The days that followed had a particular quality, not the managed crisis energy of the past weeks, but something more ordinary and therefore more precious. The floor continued its rhythms. The external investigation proceeded in the background, professional and procedural, the kind of thing that would take months and would eventually confirm what the board already knew. Chairman So did not return to the building. Yuna was not seen. The office moved on the way offices always moved on, to the next thing, the next quarter, the next deadline. Dae-sung met his mother for lunch on a Wednesday, not at the Songbuk Dong house, at a restaurant neither of them had history in. It was the first meal they had shared since the dinner that his mother had walked into. They sat across a table and talked with the careful honesty of people who had been on opposite sides of something real and were now, slowly, finding the language for what came after. She did not apologize for the apartment visit. He did not ask her to. They were both too clear-eyed for performances that would not mean anything. What she said was this: "I watched her in that boardroom evidence, not her, but the record of what she had done that morning. The document she built from memory at 2 a.m, the timestamps, the precision of it." She looked at her tea. "She did not fall apart. She built a case." "No," Dae-sung said. "She doesn't fall apart." His mother looked at him. "I know that now," she said. It was not approval in the form he had once imagined receiving it. It was something more honest than that, the acknowledgement of a woman who had looked at another woman clearly and recognized what she saw. It was enough. For now, it was enough. He was planning something. He had been planning it for 10 days by the time the Friday arrived, not obsessively, not with the anxiety of someone unsure of the outcome, but with the quiet, deliberate care he brought to everything that mattered. He had made one phone call to a jeweler he trusted. He had made one other phone call that was not to the jeweler. He had thought about location and timing and the particular quality of the moment he wanted it to be. Not a performance, not a production, not anything that would make her feel like a scene was being staged around her. Just them. The place where everything started. The elevator. He dressed differently that Friday. Not the full CEO armor of the usual suit, but something more personal. A jacket rather than a blazer. No tie. The version of himself that had sat on a wall outside her building in the evening cold and said things that needed to be said without a boardroom table between them. He appeared at the strategy floor entrance at 5:41. She looked up. She saw the jacket. Something in her expression registered the difference without announcing it. She had always noticed small things, and she had always noticed everything about him. She picked up her bag. They moved toward the elevator the way they always moved now, the particular coordination of two people who had learned each other's rhythms over months of proximity and pressure and every kind of weather that two people could move through together. No explicit communication, just the shared knowledge of direction. The floor was thinning around them. End of day. The overhead lights in their warmer evening setting. A coffee cup left on someone's desk. The ambient quiet of a Friday settling into itself. They reached the elevator bank. She pressed the button. The familiar mechanical response, the system, the distant movement of the car, filled the small waiting area. She looked at the elevator doors. He looked at the elevator doors. For a moment, just a moment, she thought about the first time. The lip gloss, the nervous energy, the stranger who had stepped in and changed everything. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. They stepped in together. The doors closed behind them. He reached into his jacket pocket. She was looking at the floor buttons, some habit of the body, the automatic registration of which floor was lit, when she felt the quality of the moment change. She turned. He was holding a small box, dark velvet, the specific size and shape that required no introduction. His expression was the most unguarded it had ever been. Not the composure of the boardroom, not the cold precision of the Songbuk-dong sitting room, not even the quiet openness of the wall outside her building. Just him. Completely him. A man who had been planning this for 10 days and was standing in an elevator in Gangnam holding a small box and looking at the woman he had first met in this exact space. Her breath caught. He opened his mouth. His phone rang. Not the personal line, the company emergency line, the particular ringtone that existed for critical institutional events, a sound that cut through everything with the specific authority of something that could not be sent to voicemail. It had rung exactly twice in his tenure as CEO. He looked at the phone. He looked at her. He looked at the box in his hand. She looked at the phone. She looked at the box. She looked at him, at his face, at the expression on it, at the particular quality of a man suspended between the most important question he had ever wanted to ask and the institutional responsibility he had never in his life been able to set aside. "Answer it," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Answer it," she said again. "I'll be here." He picked up. She watched his face as he listened, watched the shift, the man who had been holding a velvet box reassembling around the CEO who had a crisis to respond to. His jaw, his eyes going to a different kind of focus, the particular quality of someone receiving information that requires immediate action. He lowered the phone. He looked at her. "It's your brother," he said. The words landed in a specific place. "He's all right," Daesung said immediately, reading her face. "It's not that, but there's been an accident. He's in hospital. Your mother has been trying to reach you." She looked at him. Her phone, she had put it on silent during the end-of-day work and had not turned the sound back on. She pulled it out. 7 missed calls. Her mother's name, her brother's name once. "I have to go," she said. "I know," he said. He was already moving, the box back in his pocket, his phone to his ear again, speaking to someone she could not hear, arranging something she did not yet know he was arranging. "I'm getting you on the first available flight, tonight if possible." She looked at him. "Daesung." "I know," he said. "Go. I'll handle the rest." The elevator had reached the lobby. The doors opened onto the marble entrance hall, the security guard, the revolving glass doors, the ordinary, enormous world. She stepped out. She turned once, briefly, and looked back at him standing in the elevator. Jacket, not suit, the small velvet box invisible in his pocket, his phone to his ear arranging flights and logistics and whatever else he had already begun to arrange. He looked at her. "This conversation," he said, "is not finished." She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded. Then she turned and walked through the revolving glass doors into the Seoul night. Behind her, the elevator doors began to close. She did not see them close. She was already moving, her phone to her ear, her mother's voice on the other end, the city opening up around her with the particular enormity it always had when the personal and the world collided, and there was nothing to do but move through it. In the elevator, alone, the doors met. He stood in the small mirrored space, the same steel walls, the same recessed light, the same button panel, and he looked at his reflection, and he looked at the phone in his hand, and he looked at the pocket where the box was. Then he made the next call. She had gone to a church and found her voice. She had walked into a boardroom and found her vindication. She had stood in a corridor with handcuffs catching the light and not broken, not once, not for a single visible second across everything that had been thrown at her in 4 episodes. And now she was on a plane, going home, not running, not hiding, going to the people who needed her the way she had always gone to the people who needed her, directly, without hesitation, with everything she had. There is a question that has been sitting in a velvet box in a jacket pocket since this elevator closed. There is a man making phone calls in a lobby in Gangnam. There is a mother in Songbuk-dong who has been asked to do something she has never done before. And there is a woman on a plane going home who does not yet know that she will not be going alone for long. Part 5 is the finale, the last chapter. The ending this story has been earning since a woman fixed her lip gloss in a mirrored elevator and a stranger stepped in and everything changed. Drop a comment and tell me, are you ready? And tell me where in the world you are watching from because I want to know who has been here for this whole journey. Subscribe right now so you are the first to know when the finale drops, because Part 5 is everything. Thank you for watching all the way through. That means everything.